Hello, Ramon. How are you?
Fantastic, Miss Teresa Anderson. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're going to be speaking this morning to Ramon Espinoza. He's a loan officer, and we've been doing a series on the home buying process, and we've already covered the buyer's due diligence. We've covered the loan process. Last week, we talked about underwriting and how during that period of time, we're doing home inspections, we're doing appraisals, we're getting the client ready to close, right?
Now we're gonna get to the fun part.
Now we're going to get to the fun part. So tell us what happens right after, what happens at underwriting that puts us into the next step, Ramon?
Okay, so we talked about last week. Every buyer goes through two underwriting processes. So we got final approval. Once you get final approval, the client, the borrower, has to get what's called the closing disclosure. The closing disclosure is a very important document in the transaction because it's like a 99% accurate schedule for the consumer to see all their numbers. The interest rate, APR, title fees, everything that's on that loan. So there's no surprises. There's no more bait and switch as they used to call it back in the day. So they see what they're going to see at the end. That document, once it's signed, there's a 3-day waiting period. So you can't even go to closing table until 3 days have passed from the day you signed the closing disclosure. You'll hear the term closing disclosure, CD, but in loan terminology, it's called closing disclosure, but a very good piece of document. So now we get to final approval. Sign the CD. Guess what happens next?
What happens? Tell us.
So now we get to the legal docs, right? And
Right.
again, it's not a wave of magic wand and legal docs are title minutes after final underwriting. Every department has its own timelines. So final approval goes through the other doc department and then they draw the legal documents. That's when title and the lender start balancing again for the final numbers. Once those figures are scheduled or done, then the consumer's called to come sign the legal documents. The legal documents are important because that's everything gets recorded, right? The note, the deed of trust, those documents are very important. So those all get signed at the end. What typically you'll sign the day before your close of escrow date on your contract. Why is that important, Teresa?
What the
So
close?
why is it important for the buyer to sign the day before the actual closing date on the contract?
Well, because there are several processes that have to happen between the time that he signs to the day that it closes, right? And
Right.
monies have to be transferred. They cannot, they have to be in the title company in order for the transaction to close.
Think about it. We're trying to process a $500,000 transaction
Right.
and we're trying to rush through the steps, right? Oh, it's easy. We'll sign and record the next day, the same day. Well, again, the lenders have a lot to do, the title companies have a lot to do, the realtors have a lot to do. There's a lot of steps, and typically you got to be done by 12 o'clock that day because you get
And
into the
you
afternoon.
have to do the final walkthrough too to make sure that the house is in the condition.
Right, that's what I mean.
uh,
You got a lot of stuff to do too, right?
We have a lot of things to do too. As a loan officer, you have a lot of things to do. And then the title company has, like I said, if the buyer has to come in with money, it has to be transferred. Things happen at banks, where the wire might not come in on time. So yeah, we need to sign the day before.
And two major points at that process at the end. We do what's called the verification of employment. It's a verbal. So basically somebody picks up the phone at the bank, calls your company to make sure you're still working. People get mad, but hey, you have to make sure you're still working the day of closing. Uh the other one, I some way.
So how does that affect us if we're not working that day? I mean, if we're no longer working there, and you
Well,
haven't and you haven't informed your loan officer or your realtor.
the loan will stop right then and there. everything, even if you signed, the buyer signed the legal documents, it stops right there as soon as the bank, because the bank won't send the wire without a verbal verification of employment.
Well,
Here's
it's
another one.
kind of like when you get a pre-qual or a pre-approval, and then you go and you buy a new car or you buy furniture for your new house and you put it on credit card, that's going to come back. You should do all those things right after you close.
Yeah, I get that question all the time, right? After they sign their legal documents, they go, "Can we go to American Furniture Warehouse and start buying furniture?" Like, no. So, and it's so we do, to that second point, all banks do a soft pull the day of closing to make sure you haven't bought a car, you haven't bought, $30,000 of furniture, stuff like that, so again, they're lending you $500,000. I don't even like to say 500K anymore. I like to say $500,000 because that's how impactful is what we all do in this business.
Well, that's good.
So, what happens after the wire? I send the wire to title. What happens?
Well, we're now ready to close.
So what happens at those steps?
I don't know. You tell us.
So title gets the money, the wire from the Federal Reserve. Remember, Federal Reserve comes from New York. So title receives the money, and then each title company has to send to the state or the county to record that transaction. That means they're removing the seller and adding the buyer and anybody that was going to be added to title. Teresa, by real estate law, can the buyer get the keys before it's recorded?
No. No.
Just no, right?
Uh-huh.
Just no.
It's just no, because, unless you've negotiated with the seller that the move-in happens for a fee or, if that's an agreement that the seller and the buyer have, but as a realtor, we always discourage that because so many things can happen. Even within a 5-hour period, things can happen. So legally, you don't own the house till it records in your name. And then as a realtor, I can give you the key.
And that's when you take the photos at the door, the buyer gets the keys,
Right.
They move in, and the triangle is very happy.
Yeah. The triangle is.
Congratulations to the buyer. It's sometimes a daunting task, but you bought a $500,000 house in 30 days.
Right. So what I want to do, Ramon, is that I want to show on the screen, the process that we've been following, right? So that if you're looking at this and you want to take can you see that screen now?
Yeah.
So that we know exactly what happens in that process that we've been talking about so much, right? We're actually following a process from start to finish, and that's when we say welcome home.
Right.
So Ramon, now that we've talked about this, now that we've gone through this whole process, what advice can you give our buyers? You've explained that process, but what advice could you give a buyer about their very first step? Why is it important to have those key people in that triangle? I know we've talked about this, but I'd like to close with that, right?
I just feel it's personable. If this transaction, it's the biggest transaction you're going to do in your life. Your financial future's at stake on this, right? That's why we buy homes.
Right.
We buy homes as investments, right? Long term, even if you're going to live there and die there. But if you don't feel comfortable with the person you're talking to or the person that's giving you the information, seek other avenues. Get comfortable. Make sure they're knowledgeable. There's so much noise, and now with AI coming out, I call it noise because it's if you read information, it's not gospel. There's something to be said about talking to a human and humanize this process to make sure you understand that someone there either is on your corner or is not on your corner or doesn't know or may not know or does it part-time. All those things are important for you, the consumer, right? And that's the key, is it's what's gonna make the consumer have a great experience and not get upset about this process. It's a hard process, don't get me wrong. But if you have positive people, then so my only recommendation is stay in touch with your loan officer and your realtor at all times and don't ignore conversations.
So make sure that you have a knowledgeable loan officer, you have a knowledgeable real estate agent, you know, that they're people that actually do this for a living.
Full time.
Because full time, because a realtor, the job of a realtor is to have that fiduciary, you know, responsibility towards the client. You know, most people don't know what that means. And that means is taking care of the clients, not only their needs, but protecting, you know, their largest investment, whether it's an investment to in a home you're going to live in, or an investment as an investment house. You know, you still have to protect all this process so that when we do hand that key and say welcome home, you know, we have covered all of the little loopholes, right, that are involved in this process.
I have a little saying that I use to myself, right? And I talked about it with my son who helps in this business. When you come from contribution for others, everything else falls into place.
That's right.
So I'll leave you with that for today.
Well, thank you, Ramon. And next week, let's talk about the market update. How's that?
Perfect. Let's do it.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.